Well, first of all, I want to express my gratitude to the Auxilium Foundation for inviting me to this very important conference. It is a great honor and a privilege to me. A special thanks also to journalist Margaret Sater-Volczyk, who mediated between the foundation and myself. Well, I have prepared some slides, not very many, about the situation in Spain, which will be my standpoint, or the points I begin with. In the interest of accuracy and in the interest of clarity, I thought it would be best I wrote down my reflections, because I'm not so confident about my oral English. So I will be reading what I wrote. I will start by presenting the situation of my country, Spain, which is, I think, quite representative of the general European trend. Spain is headed on a course towards demographic collapse because of our very low birth rate. In 2020, there were in Spain, as you can see on the slide, roughly 340,000 births, and only 70% of those babies were born to native Spanish mothers. In the decade of 1860, in the 19th century, as you can see in the slide, when the Spanish population was 3 times smaller, there were some 600,000 births every year. Our fertility rate has plummeted down to lowest low depth. It is currently 1.2 children per woman, namely 45% below replacement level. Because we have been 40 years below replacement, our age pyramid is already seriously damaged. Today, there are in Spain 3 million fewer people in ages 20 to 39 than there were only 20 years ago. This means 3 million less people in fertile age. This is our current age pyramid. As you can see, there are many people in their 40s and their 50s and not enough young people. So the problem will come when people who are in their 50s will retire in 10, 20 years' time. Then there will not be enough young taxpayers to support their retirement pensions, to pay for their retirement pensions. In the year 2020, the deaths of native Spaniards outnumbered births by 223,000, almost 250,000 more deaths than births in 2020. That is, in just 1 year, we suffered a loss of population almost equivalent to the one we endured in the 3 years of our civil war, 1936 to 1939. The number of casualties in that war was of 270,000 dead. The ratio in 2020 was of 1.9 deaths for each birth. We have been losing population for 10 years now. In spite of our catastrophic demographic situation, in Spain, there is hardly any social debate on this question. Yes, the government has enacted a so-called national strategy for the demographic challenge, but in its dozens of pages, you will not even find words such as father, mother, family, or natality. Our government understands by demographic challenge merely the flight of young people from rural areas to the big cities and the Mediterranean coast. The government insists on framing the issue as a problem of uneven territorial distribution of the population, not as one of insufficient births. The collapse of natality is a taboo in Spain. There is no such thing as a policy of birth promotion. Whenever I try to get Spaniards to discuss the demographic issue, I find most people shift the blame of our low birth rates to economic factors, such as unemployment or precarious jobs. However, economic factors are secondary, in my opinion. If there is some correlation between wealth and natality, it is one of inverse proportionality. The richer a country gets, the less children people have. The wealthiest countries of the world have very low birth rates. In Singapore, for example, it is an abysmal 1 child per woman. Luxembourg, the country with the highest GDP per capita in Europe, has a birth rate of 1.3 children per woman, hardly higher than the Spanish one. In Spain, we have 1.2 children per woman. Vice versa, the last countries to enjoy very high fertility rates of 5 or 6 children per woman are African countries sunk in destitution. If the reason why we do not procreate is poverty, how could our grandparents breed 3 times more children than us when their income was so much lower? If the reason is the precarity of jobs, how can it happen that civil servants enjoying lifetime jobs have as few children as the rest? I believe the cause of our baby bust is cultural, not economic. I believe it is connected with the sexual revolution, feminism, and changes in the family model. Therefore, I should explain the state of the family in Spain. The most relevant trend in that respect is the gradual demise of marriage. In Spain, like in most of Europe, people are getting married less and less, and those who do marry are doing it later and later, and their marriages are failing more and more. That is, divorce is on the rise. The nuptiality rate has dropped in Spain by 50% in less than 50 years, from 7.18 in 1975 to 3.5 in 2019. The average age people tie the knot has been rising constantly. Spanish males are getting married at 38 years of age, in average, and females at 35. The cohabiting couple is displacing marriage as the standard formula of union between both sexes. Both kinds of partnership, cohabiting couple and marriage, differ in nature. Marriage implies a lifelong shared destiny, until death do us part. The cohabiting couple, by contrast, rests on the assumption that the partners will stay together only as long as love lasts. Statistically, married couples are more enduring than free unions, even if marriage has become more fragile in this day and age. And it is easier to make the choice of begetting a child with a theoretically lifelong committed spouse than with a transitory love partner. This is reflected in the respective fertility rates, which is 1.8 children per woman in married couples, by comparison 1.39 in free unions when the union is registered, and 1.21 when the union is not registered. The decline of marriage is shown as well by the steady rise of out-of-wedlock births, even if, as I said, unmarried couples are less fertile than married ones. In 2019, the ratio of out-of-wedlock births attained 48% in Spain and keeps rising. So it is higher than the American one, as shown by Dr. Morse a while ago. It was, I think, 42% in the States. Now then, the collapse of birth rates arose out of the family revolution. And the family revolution, in turn, was a consequence of the sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s. Despite its Marxist shell, the riots of May 1968, in Paris, for example, inaugurated an age of ultra-individualism. Since 1968, as pointed out by Gilles Lipovetsky in Le Crépuscule du Devoir, it is no longer immoral to think only about yourself, I quote. Not only is it not immoral, hedonism, the maximization of pleasure and freedom, has become the basis of the new morality. The sovereign individual asserts his right to pleasure, his right to selfishness, in the face of whatever heteronymous imperatives stemming from social interest, historical continuity, or preservation of the human species. This absolutization of freedom concerns particularly the sexual domain. The notion that every person is entitled to use his body as he likes in pursuit of sexual pleasure is an unquestionable tenet of the post-1968 social order. The only exception is the banning of sex with children, but this taboo is already under attack, and we don't know how much longer it will hold. As Jean Sevilli pointed out in his book Moralement Correct, this dogmatization of sexual freedom generates a number of taboos characteristic of present-day society. One of them is the so-called right to get an abortion. A sexually libertine society requires abortion as the ultimate contraceptive safety net. And this means we are sacrificing the right to life of the unborn to the infinite sexual freedom of their parents. As Ann Coulter wrote, the right to abortion actually implies, I quote, the right of women to have sex with men they don't want to have children with, end of quote. The sacralization of the abortion rights is attaining preposterous extremes. In Spain, volunteers from pro-life associations have been forbidden from even approaching abortion clinics, where they would pray and try to offer alternatives to women demanding an abortion. And in France, recently, abortion has been embedded in the Constitution as an inalienable right. Another taboo deriving from the sexual revolution is the implicit prohibition of mentioning the risk of promiscuity. For example, media coverage of the emergence and spread of the AIDS disease concealed the fact that its main cause had been promiscuity, and particularly homosexual promiscuity. In Spain, the mayor of Madrid, Agustín Rodríguez Sagún, was mocked by most journalists when he spelled out the obvious, namely that the safest way to avoid AIDS was to have sex only with your spouse. On the other hand, authorities hand out morning-after pills to minor girls behind the backs of their parents, even though these morning-after pills are dangerous for the girl's health. As Gabriele Cubi has written, I quote, "Government concern for the health of citizens, especially that of the young, jumps out of the window when sex is around." A third taboo derived from the sacralization of sexual freedom is the full moral equivalence between heterosexuality and homosexuality. This taboo is seriously enforced by the guardians of woke orthodoxy in the media, social media, and even in laws. Whoever deviates 1 millimeter from the dogma will see his reputation in jeopardy. Given that sex is not understood anymore as an instrument of conservation of our species, but first and foremost as a pleasure-giving activity, the worth of heterosexuality, namely its procreative power, is not appreciated anymore. Nowadays, love between a man and a woman is portrayed as simply one more option with an almost endless variety of sexual options and identities. And this is happening in a society that is on the brink of demographic suicide, as I tried to show before for my own country. The Gay Pride Parade does not gather only homosexuals anymore. Many heterosexuals attend as well, and this is very meaningful. These heterosexuals join in a celebration of infinite sexual freedom, the true idol of our society. Homosexuals are regarded as heroes or pioneers who debunked one of the pillars of traditional sexual morality, that of heteronormativity. Every demolition of prohibitions enjoys a plus of legitimacy in the eyes of our contemporaries. The absolutization of sexual freedom implies, on the other hand, the end of marriage, as attested by the figures I mentioned before. In fact, the current average European is not willing to promise lifelong fidelity. What is considered right in this day and age is to change partner if one desires another person's another person more intensely. One does not owe fidelity to his spouse. One must only remain faithful to one's desire, to one's freedom. The classical family model was based not on the absolutization of sexual freedom, but quite the opposite, on its subordination to the conservation of society. The purpose of the institution of marriage was to encourage the formation of long-lasting man-woman couples. It was presumed that children would ordinarily result from that stable union of man and woman. And it was presumed that the best environment for the raising of those children was precisely the couple formed by the parents. This is why marriage is an institution, or in religious language, a sacrament, and not a mere rite or contract. Its function is not simply to adjust the desires of two individuals, but to create the following generation, a task in which the whole of the community is somehow involved. The spouses do not commit themselves only to each other, they are also committed to the society they belong to. They commit to have children and educate them. This is why weddings have been in all cultures the social occasion par excellence. In a wedding, we celebrate not just the love between bride and groom, but also the perpetuation of society. Unfortunately, in Europe, there are less and less weddings. We are a post-conjugal society, and this means we will be soon a non-society. This withering away of marriage was predictable, since our contemporaries conceived marriage as the mere certification of a love feeling, and you can see why feelings would need to be certified. Should we ask the state for permission to love somebody? Youth believe we shouldn't, and therefore they move to live together as long as love lasts. The new family model is no longer child-centered, but adult-centered. It is no longer communitarian, but individualist. Its focus is no longer the need of the child to be raised by his parents, or the need of society to ensure its own survival. Its new focus is the absolute love freedom of the adult, who must be free to change couple as many times as his feelings so demand, to beget children or not, to love a person of the opposite sex or of his own sex. Children are no longer in the center, but in a fuzzy outer fringe. If they ever come to existence, they will have to adapt to the discretionary love life of one of the parents, usually the mother. The ratio of children not living with both biological parents is constantly rising in Europe. Children are the big losers of the sexual revolution. A central tenet of the new ethics of sex and family is the notion that there are many family models and they are all equally valuable. This is not true if we judge them by their contribution to social sustainability. As I said before, married couples have more children than cohabiting couples, and certainly more than same-sex couples, which are sterile by nature. In addition, children who are brought up by their married father and mother fare better in all parameters of infant welfare. They do better at school. They are less likely to suffer physical aggression or sexual abuse. They are less likely to indulge in juvenile delinquency, substance consumption, teen pregnancy, and so on. The disclosure of this functional superiority of the traditional family is virtually forbidden by the woke quasi-dictatorship, because it debunks the tenet of equal desirability of all family models. Even many conservatives dare not enunciate it, as they fear they might hurt the feelings of many people living in non-traditional family arrangements. But nobody should feel individually, should be feel judged individually judged by those comparisons, just as no smoker or drinker should be offended by medical studies showing the dangers of tobacco or alcohol. Persons are not to be blamed. We are all children of our times. All of us have been affected in one way or another by the fallout of half a century of sexual revolution. Nobody is to be judged individually, but we do have to judge ourselves collectively as a society. We must realize that we have embraced values which are leading us to decline and unsustainability. The cultural climate of present-day Europe does not favor a comeback of conservative family values. The state-sponsored ideology of Western Europe is what has been named lately wokeism. I think wokeism resulted from the combination of three intellectual roots. The first is radical environmentalism, which has lately taken the form of climate scaremongering. The second is an ultra-individualist liberalism, preaching the liberation of the subject from whatever natural, moral, or social constraints, as well as the constant invention of new rights. The third is a form of neo-Marxism that replaces the class struggle of classical Marxism with the war of genders, races, and sexual orientations. The neo-Marxist ingredient is usually called identity politics in the Anglosphere, and it comprises radical feminism, so-called anti-racism, and LGBT ideology. Wokeism has become a sort of state religion, an orthodoxy being taught in schools, universities, laws, big corporations. We are told from all those instances that the planet is in danger and we must give up fossil fuels, but only Westerners must, because China, India, etc. may continue to emit carbon dioxide non-stop. We are taught that women are oppressed by men, non-whites are oppressed by whites, and homosexuals by heterosexuals. We are taught that the government can constantly create new rights. Those who dissent from these claims are vilified as fascist or far-right. Their reputation, our reputation, and jobs will be at risk. This authoritarian drift of wokeism has resulted in some voices denouncing the new soft totalitarianism. For example, Rod Dreher in his recent book, Live Not by Lies, and I have myself published recently a book in Spanish called Against Soft Totalitarianism. Not only does wokeism become increasingly intolerant, but it also gets more hysterical, not historical, but hysterical. Just take a look at the feminist marches on March the 8th, the exhibitionist acting out of feminine activists, the rage displayed in the riots following the death of George Floyd in the United States. As Mary Eberstadt has written, I quote, campuses across the Western world have become proxenia for the enactment of identity panic, complete with safe spaces, trigger warnings, appropriation conflicts, and other intriguing linguistic innovations. And the shouting down of speakers with unwanted views has become routine. End of quote. The anger, the irrationality displayed in such mobilizations are ever more stunning. Woke activists are not interested in rational debate. On the contrary, they demand that anyone disagreeing with them be accused of hate speech. Dialogue with them is impossible. Douglas Murray has provided interesting insights about the woke movement, the rationality of an ever more fanatic feminism, precisely at the time and place where for the first time in history, women enjoy exactly the same rights as men. The victimist paranoia of LGBT movements precisely in the West, where homosexuality is not only tolerated, but actually promoted by corporations, cinema, and sexual education. These movements, in addition, have a plain anti-family and anti-natality influence, since Simone de Beauvoir, the so-called second-wave feminism, understood motherhood as biological servitude of women. The top priority for present-day feminists is not the perpetuation of the species, but a sick conception of the relationship between males and females as a struggle for power. As for radical environmentalism, it incites young people to have less children for the sake of the planet. Mary Eberstadt has offered in her book Primal Screams a compelling explanation of this hysterical drift. That explanation relies on the sexual revolution and the crisis of the family. Eberstadt argues that the question, who am I, is fundamental to all of us. For millennia, this question found an answer in religion and family. I am a child of God, I am a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, I am the father of these children, I am the son of these parents, I belong to this kin. Religion and family provided a framework of meaning and a source of identity. But religion seems to be dying in a post-Christian West, and the family has been undermined and shrunk in the ways I have just explained. The youths of today have less siblings and cousins than the members of previous generations used to have. Not only are relatives less numerous, they are provisional as well. Instead of a bedrock foundation of ancestors and parents, the children of today experience a shifting framework of replaceable characters. The mother's new lover, the father's new girlfriend, transitory stepbrothers and stepsisters, temporary grandparents and cousins, etc. This fragilization of the family, what Eberstadt calls the great scattering, has resulted in a great orphanhood. Deprived of religious or familial identity, millennials are in search of new sources of the self, to cite Charles Taylor's formula. They find them in gender, race, and sexual orientation. Trivial features such as gender or skin color come to be experienced as causes worth fighting for, and identity frameworks providing meaning and protection. The young woman who grew up in a fatherless home, who has not wanted or has not been able to find a husband or have children or had children, will find an ersatz family in sorority and the women's movement. The historical irrationality of wokeism, the breakdown of the family, and the collapse of natality bolster one another, dragging down the West to a self-destruction spiral. Why don't we wake up? I believe our elites are relying on several false solutions. One of them is immigration. Open your borders for African, Asian, or Latin American immigrants to pour in and replace the children Europeans have not had. It is a false solution because the average immigrant possesses a lower professional qualification than the average European he is expected to stand in for. In Spain, the unemployment rate of immigrants is 50% higher than that of native Spaniards. Foreigners make up 12% of Spain's resident population, but they only pay 3% of the income tax collection. Foreigners consume more welfare benefits than they contribute to their funding. The arrival is not a magic solution for the sustainability of retirement pensions. Not to mention the problems of clash of civilizations. There are neighborhoods in Paris, Marseille, Malmö, Barcelona, Bradford that resemble Algeria more than Europe. No-go zones the police hardly dares to enter, and where the last European residents try to escape from. Of course, there are many law-abiding immigrants, but crime rate is statistically much higher among immigrants than among native Europeans. In her recent book, Prey, Somali writer Ajan Hirsi Ali has shown how the arrival of many young males from Islamic countries has boosted sexual delinquency in several European countries. The second fake hope of the elites as a quick fix solution for the demographic collapse would be some technological flight forward that would allow us to dissociate procreation from love and marriage. Since Europeans do not seem able to form long-lasting couples anymore, we could try to individualize reproduction. If in the 60s or from the 60s onwards, the birth control pill allowed for sex without children, thus laying out the foundation for the sexual revolution, the new assisted reproduction techniques now allow for children without sex, the opposite, children without sex. Those techniques were presented at first as a remedy for stable man-woman couples suffering from fertility problems, but they evolved fast toward the artificial insemination of women lacking a male partner, as well as surrogate motherhood for men without a female partner. We might be on the brink of legal recognition of the right to a child of single persons. The father-mother-child triangle will be declared obsolete. Procreation will become an individual issue. The victims will be once again the children, deprived of the right to one father and one mother, as Professor Morse explained before. The victim will be human nature itself, which included procreation being the fruit of love, not of the purchase of reproductive cells or sperm donations. The overcoming of sexual reproduction is a form of transhumanism. It involves the abolition of man. Other prophets of transhumanist philosophy, people like Nick Bostrom, Max More, or Raymond Kurzweil, are openly proposing the addition of the human genome or the fusion of man and machine, the so-called cyborg. It sounds like science fiction, but Elon Musk announced some days ago that the first Neuralink chips will be implanted in human brains in 2023. I believe progressives would rather accelerate the progress of NBIC technologies in pursuit of the Übermensch, the Superman, than get back to the good old mommy and daddy household. Our problem is probably one of hybris. That is a Greek word which means something like historical arrogance. The scientific and technological revolution, the stunning progress of mankind in the control of nature from the 17th century onwards has made us believe that we are much smarter than our ancestors. We take for granted that all that is old, including traditional sexual ethics and family model, is contemptible. All that is old is contemptible. After having dominated extra-human nature, we are beginning to achieve the technical ability to modify human nature itself. There is a real danger of abolition of man, as C.S. Lewis put it. He wrote in that book, I quote, "Human nature will be the last part of nature to surrender to man. We will be henceforth free to make our species whatever we wish it to be. The battle will indeed be won, but who precisely will have won it?" End of quote. The verses of Deuteronomy 30 in the Bible seem addressed to us. I quote, "I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God." End of quote. Yes, the moment may not be that far when we will have to decide if the species Homo sapiens is worth preserving, or if we will let it extinguish out of reproductive tiredness or environmental fanaticism, or transcend it with transhumanism. Remy Braque wrote a book named The Legitimacy of man, la légitimité de l'homme. Jews and Christians believed man was valuable not on the grounds of his own merit, but because God thinks of him. What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them, says Psalm number 8. Since the 18th century, we have believed we could get along without God, overconfident as we were with scientific technological success. Maybe the day is coming when, in order to save the legitimacy of man, we will have no choice but to look to the God who, so the Bible says, created us in his likeness and commanded us to thrive and multiply. The question, why should there be humans on earth, maybe admits only a theological response. I don't know if there will be a religious revival in Europe. Symptoms are not very encouraging so far. The church, on the other hand, has, to some extent or on some occasions, sided with wokeism, especially in the present pontificate. But I do believe there are glimmers of hope showing that half of Europe is not resigned to die, to paraphrase Spanish politician José María Gil Robles, alluding to Spain on the eve of our civil war. Half of Spain is not resigned to die. The hope of the West is now centered on countries like Poland or Hungary. Poles, Hungarians, and other Eastern European peoples have understood that the survival of their nations depends on the reinvigoration of family and birth rates. All through the West, parties of the so-called New Right, like Vox, the party I represent in the Spanish Parliament, are gaining ground. I believe and I hope that Europe has not said its last word yet. Thank you for your attention.